What is going on? Joey, you there? Hit the chat if that's you. Looks like there's one or maybe two people on right now. Yo. All right, so being mindful of time, I'm going to go ahead and jump into this. I'm just going to give you kind of a quick heads up of kind of what you're seeing on the screen and what I might be flipping back and forth between the two screens here. The one that currently says mix window, you're seeing OBS and YouTube, but I'll slide over and I'll show you. This is the actual mix window from Pro Tools. So if I ever need to show that, I'll slide over and show it. But when I actually get into this, it's going to go full screen and you're just going to see the edit window or the mix window. I'm just kind of showing this as a preview to show you the different screens you might see. Also, there is probably like a 10 to 15 second delay between what I'm actually saying and presenting to the time that you're going to see it. I tried to select the lowest latency I possibly could in YouTube Studio for this live stream, but even with that, there was still like a 10 to 15 second delay. So just know that I will be monitoring for your questions. When I see them and start answering them, it will be at least 15 or 10 to 15 seconds after you've actually asked it or after I've actually seen it and started answering it. So with that, I'm just going to go ahead and get started and I'll monitor for questions. So let me zoom in on my edit window here. All right, so I'll just kind of quickly play this back so you can just, again, hear a refresher of kind of what we're going to be looking at today. And I will point out that this EQ that you're seeing on the screen, I'm going to kind of keep this up on the screen the whole time. It is a fixed window I've got up because as I start getting into some of the plugins and things that I've done in this mix, you'll see how that affects things, the frequency spectrum and whatnot. So we'll get into that. And I just realized I want to actually record this as well. So, all right. So I'm going to go ahead and play this back. And here it is. Oh no. Oh. Well, okay, I just realized you can't hear that because I didn't turn on the loopback audio. Wait. No, it should be on. Oh, are you kidding me? I literally just had this working. All right, let's see if this... What is going on? Oh, okay. Sorry, 1 second. I can fix it. Forgot to add the audio here. Audio input. Existing loopback. Rookie mistake, y'all. First time streamer, bear with me. All right, now you should be hearing it. Let's do this again. Awesome. I'm seeing your comments come through that it's all good. So I'm assuming y'all are just now seeing again, the delay. You're probably just now hearing the DAW playback. I've already stopped it. So I'm just going to keep going, and I will monitor for comments. So drop those in as you have them. I'm going to go ahead and start from the top down. So looking at this is my master bus, often referred to as the 2 bus. This is the main master bus right here. And so looking at the plugins I've got, I have the Slate Digital Virtual Mix Rack. And what I'm doing here is basically running the entire mix through a virtual, like digital summing process here through these. It's currently the Neve like 1073 style preamp. I've also got the New York one here. I don't remember which one this is. I think it's maybe like an API preamp or something like that. I don't remember, but sometimes I'll flip back and forth between them just to kind of see what it sounds like. I liked the Neve more on this one. Turning up the virtual drive just a tiny bit to try and add some like subtle, very, very subtle harmonics into the overall mix here. It's a very subtle thing. And in fact, I'll play it back and turn this on and off. You're unlikely to really hear it. It's more something that like you just kind of feel. It adds that whole like analog summing vibe to it. So there you go. I turned it off for a little bit there after it started playing for a few seconds. Again, you probably won't hear it. It's meant to kind of be one of those things you feel a little bit more. But that's the very first thing going on in the master bus. And the second one is the Pro Q you're seeing here. And this is just for monitoring. I often put one of these EQs in here, and I will disable it if I actually go to render the track. But this is just so that I can monitor the whole frequency spectrum as you're seeing. And one thing I do want to point out, because you're seeing it in this EQ, is like this top end error that's just consistently coming through here. This is coming from one of the Contact synths that I have. It's like this retro style synth, so it's got all this like fuzzy character to it, which I liked for this. But if I disable this Contact instrument, if I remember which one it was one of these. I don't know. One of these Contact instruments down here for these synths is where all this kind of top end air is coming from. So you can just kind of disregard that. And then continuing on with the master bus is my limiter that I've been using more recently. This is the BX True Peak limiter or something like that. Limiter True Peak, said it backwards. So I will just turn this on and off. You can hear a difference. When I turn it off, all the volume's going to drop out. But basically, the way that I typically tend to use this is I set my ceiling at 0.10. The XL feature is their version of like a certain style of saturation. A lot of times I'll keep it just completely off because I'm using a tiny touch of saturation in the virtual mix rack you saw in the preamp, and I also have Black Box HG2 MS that we'll get to in just a second. But in this track, I put it like 10%, just a tiny bit. I like the way it sounded, so I left it. And then the gain is where you ultimately just kind of increase the overall volume, which obviously reduces the dynamic range. And then your release you can play with just to kind of try and remove any sort of like pumping that might be happening. And then the tone controls, I don't usually ever touch these except for maybe the low pass and the high pass. Just pull that down a little bit. Anything really above 20, 21 is pointless. It's too high to really even hear. And then the high pass, I usually either don't use it or set it to about 10. 10 hertz is just crazy low as it is. So that's that. The foundation is just their take on like tonal shaping. And I usually just keep it right at 0. In fact, I usually turn it off, but 0 isn't doing anything. But pulling it to the left is more dark. Pulling it to the right is a brighter sound. But I just usually leave it. The channel link, limiter, mix, and output dim. I don't even remember what all this is. I think the limiter mix is exactly what you would think. It's kind of like the parallel mixing it. So you pull it back, you'll get less of the processing and more of the original sound. And then you've got all these different individual solo monitorings, which is actually really nice. You can flip the left and right channels. You can solo just the left channel, solo just the right channel, or listen. So like when you hit left, it'll actually play just the left channel through both speakers like a mono source signal. or if you use the SIP, it actually just goes to the left or the right. You can monitor just the mids or just the sides. So the overall is a fantastic plugin. You can also say like what your target is, and it kind of gives you these meter readings to tell you how you're doing towards that target. Again, I'm going to play this back. I'll turn it off and then turn it back on so you can hear the difference. Y'all let me know if the stream is breaking up at all. I'm getting periodic spinners in my YouTube Studio console here, so I'm not sure if that's just my end or if the stream is breaking up for y'all. So do let me know if it is breaking up. But for now, I will keep moving until I see y'all say that it's either breaking up or it's good. All right, so that's the master bus, and the next up is the main bus. Okay, so pause for a bit, reload the page, it's all good now. All right, so hopefully it's just my end. Again, it's continuously showing me like a little spinner, and then it'll stop, and then it'll do a spinner, and then it'll stop. So just hit the comments if the stream does stop or pause really bad, let me know. But again, I'm going to keep trucking. So the next up is my main bus. So it goes, I'm going in reverse order. So the very next bus, kind of like from the top down, right? So at the very top is the master output, which is what you just saw. From there is my main bus. And so like, let me back up just for 1 second. So I have a main and I have a pre-main. So the way that this goes is all of the individual summing buses from the drums and my guitar, bass, vocal, or I don't have vocals in this, but synths and effects tracks, stuff like that, are all routed to either the pre-main or the main. And then anything that goes through the pre-main will go into main. So everything goes through main and then out to the master bus. Now, why do I have a pre-main, which some things go through, and then a main, which other things like bypass the pre-main to go directly into main? I hope you're following me with all this. The reason for that is because there are certain things that I want to have processed like in an overall master bus kind of way, and some things that I don't. And the way that I currently break that up is my drums, my bass, my vocals, my synth and effects, stuff like that. Those will all go through main, so that I can kind of like sum them all together with, or I'm sorry, those all go through pre-main. I apologize. They go through pre-main first, then to main, then to the master bus. And again, why do I do that? Well, it's because all of those I want kind of summed together in one bus without the guitars, because I want the guitars to, I don't want all of the additional top end and saturation and stuff like that I'm doing in the pre-main to be added to the guitars. But I do want the guitars to be summed together before it hits the compressor with everything else to do that even leveling and make sure that my guitars, my bass, my drums, my vocals, everything is all summed together and smoothed out with a final compressor in the main. So that's the way I break it up. I hope that makes sense. If you have questions about that or want to know anything more detailed, hit the comments and just let me know. But looking at the main, I'm using the Shadow Hills Mastering Compressor Class A. You can see kind of the settings I've got going on here. I've got this set up in dual mono mode so that with the parameter link on the bottom here. So what that means is each side of this compressor, you can either have it in dual mono or stereo right here in the middle. So stereo will just basically take and it will process the same settings through the left and the right channel, I believe, even though that seems counterintuitive. But dual mono is the opposite. It's actually taking the settings on the left and applying it specifically to the left channel, and then the settings on the right specifically to the right channel, so that it's reacting independently depending on the left and the right channel. And I found that just sounds better. So that's why I'm using the dual mono there. There's a lot to go over in this compressor, so I'm not going to go over everything, or we'll be here the entire time just talking about everything you can do in this compressor. Jump in Discord in the mixing channel, or even the plugin channel, if you have any questions specific to features of this compressor, and I'd be happy to answer those. But a high-level overview is this. This top section up here is the optical compression section, and then the bottom section, the bottom half of it is the I forget what type of compressor. It's probably something like a VCA, if I remember correctly, but like it's optical, and then it goes into a different style, which I think again is a VCA, something like that. And then that way you can run it through the optical, which is a slower style of more smoothing compression, before you hit it with something that might be a little bit faster. And so what I'm doing here is slightly like what I've seen Nolly do in his mixes, where you use somewhat of kind of like a faster attack. He uses a faster attack than I am here. In fact, one of my recent mixes that I'm doing on the side, I'm using kind of basically his Nolly's approach and just really slamming it quickly with a fast attack and faster release to just get a really, really punchy, smacky snare drum. And I've got the snare mixed higher overall in the mix so that it kind of it pushes everything down when the snare hits. And you'll see that happening here a little bit. So I'm gonna go ahead and play this back. The left meter is the top optical section. The right meter is the discrete section on the bottom. So you can see the difference in how the compressors are reacting to the overall signal. All right, so obviously you can hear when I bypass that, I'm kind of doing a little bit of the same technique here as well. Is you hear that snare drum, you get a little bit more of the transient smack of the transient coming through, and the snare drum just sounds louder overall. And when I turn it on, you get a little bit less of the transient. You get kind of more of a punchy sounding snare drum, because it kind of just trims off a little bit of that smack of the transient. And then also you can see it ducking about a 1.5 dB when the snare hits, which kind of levels it with the rest of the mix, so it's not sticking out anymore. So that's how I've got this set up here. And the last thing I'll go over is I've got the mono maker set at 152 hertz, so everything at 152 hertz and below is made sure to be mono, so it's not separating out on the sides. Again, you want that you want the low end of your mix to kind of hit hard right up the center. And then I am using a little bit of the stereo width here as well, just to kind of help expand a little bit. And then that's my main bus. And I see we're about 20 minutes in, and there's still a million things to go over, so I'm going to try and speed up a little bit. My pre-main, so this is some EQ, and the only thing I'm really doing here is boosting up the top end. I do have 9.4 kilohertz boosted up, 2.3 dB as well, so I must have heard something there I wanted to bring up, which is not something I typically do, so this must have been just specific for this mix. Might be because of the synths, I don't know. And then just boosting some of the low end. So this, again, is just using like a top-down style mixing approach, just starting with boosting up a little bit of the high end, and this is a top-end shelf at 16.2K. So really kind of boosting up the air of the mix. And then this is a low, not a shelf, but a fairly wide bell at like 60, almost 70 hertz, and just kind of boosting that up like 1 dB, just to kind of add some body to the overall mix. So I don't have to do quite as much EQing to the top and the low end on every single track. It's already there. All right, I see a question. Does the drum track for the Bogren contest have all of the mix bus processing baked into it? We will get to that. I'll jump to the drums. Actually, the drums are coming up literally the next thing, so I'll get into the drums in just 1 second. But the pre-main here, so this is the MX EQ. You can see I'm doing here just kind of top-down EQ. This is the Black Box HG2MS, one of my favorite plugins. You can see how I'm affecting things here. This top part is the mids, the bottom is the sides. Really nice features. You can solo kind of the changes you're making and hear those. And then adjust the saturation, the pentode and the triode, things like that. If you want to learn more about how these plugins work, I would recommend just checking out Plugin Alliance. I don't think I have time to kind of go through all the individual details of how everything works, but these are the settings I'm using here. And then the last thing in my pre-main is the Slate Digital Fresh Air. And these are actually lower settings than I typically use. I don't recall why I did this. I think it may be because there was already so much top end coming through from like those synths. But I'm usually up to about maybe 25 or so on the high, maybe about 8 to 10 on the mid air. But what I'm going to do is I'm just going to play this back quick with all three of these things bypassed, so you can hear what a difference these three make. And then I'll unbypass each one, starting with the AMAC EQ, then the black box, and then the fresh air. So this is the mix without anything in my pre-main. And I'll bring up this EQ here, and this is just actually trimming some of the super high end. So that's all that's doing. I'll leave that on. But here it is without any of this processing on the pre-main. So there you can hear what each of those individual things are doing. And by the time I got to the fresh air and turned that on, your ears were probably already kind of becoming used to the more dull, like natural, even sounding mix. Like if you were watching the EQ here, you saw how like basically flat the entire mix was. And then when I turned on the AMEC, the low and the high end kind of went up a little bit. I turned on the HG2, it kind of leveled a little bit more, brought up some of those upper mids with the saturation, and then the fresh air really kind of brought up the top end air. So by the time I turned the fresh air on, you're probably thinking, oh no, that's too much high end. But if you actually reference it against actual production mixes, you'll realize it's actually probably not even enough air overall. When it comes to like an actual production mix. I've been referencing a lot of production mixes a lot lately as part of like the Nail the Mix stuff that I'm doing, and the amount of air that is in those mixes is incredible. But you can hear the massive difference those make. And again, that is the exact reason why I don't want all of that processing on my guitars, is because it's just too much, right? For that heavy distorted sound. That's why I route the guitars directly into the main to go through the compressor, but bypass all of this like air that I'm adding to the mix. All right, so the drums. So the first thing is the routing. I just kind of want to walk through how I'm doing all of the individual routing. So I have an overall drum bus. That's my overall like summing bus. All the individual kit pieces go into this drum bus. From within that bus, and this is in Pro Tools, this is called a routing folder, which is just kind of nice because I can close and expand it. So like I just closed it there, everything within it disappears, and then I can expand it. I believe the same thing is like called stacks in Logic Pro, if I'm correct. Track stacks, I think is what it's called. Kind of the same concept. I have a drum verb and a drum punch aux track. The drum verb is basically what you'd expect. It's just some reverb I'm adding into the drums. And then the drum punch is exactly the same thing. I'm using the SPL Transient Designer, and then just a tiny bit of the BX Saturator to add a little bit of like kind of top end saturation. And that's just a really tight, like no sustain, just basically all transient, just smack that I blend in very, very low. You can see it's at -33, so it's very, very low, but just to kind of add in some smack in the drums. And then from there, we have a kick sum where I have my individual kick coming from GGD, and then I have the Bogren digital kick. And if I open up Contact, you'll see we have GGD, and if I scroll down, you'll see this is kind of strange, but in this one kick track is where I basically define everything, and then this MIDI is all of the drum tracking, and then from there, I select the individual inputs on like my snare, my toms, my overheads, all of that as one of the outputs from this Contact instrument. So just know this is where all the samples and all the drum sounds and everything are coming from. So you can see I'm using Get Good Drums as like the foundation of my drums, the Invasion. I'm using Bogren Digital's Harder Please kick. I'm using the ring job, but this is all Bogren digital samples. So the snare top I'm using, or the direct mic, is the ring job sample. And then this ambience that I'm using, which is basically just the room sound, is coming from the Super Nice, using the Helms Deep Toms. And then I have the, what was this called? The Middle Farm Studios samples. And I think it's from like 4D Sounds, I think is where I got these. I think that's the name of it. But I'm using, so this one down here is muted. So it's just this one. This is the Pearl snare. And so I'm blending, so I'm sending all of these through multi-outputs, through this multi-output contact instrument. So if I just solo the kick here, for example, this is both the GGD kick with the Bogren kick. So I'll solo that and then just solo the individual pieces. Okay, so that's all of them summed together. So if I solo just the GGD kick, okay, and then just this is just the Bogren kick. So those are the kicks that are kind of blended together. And on that sum, I'm using this is the EQ again, Plugin Alliance EQ, Better Maker EQ 232D. I'm basically just using the PEQ, which is like a Pultec style EQ, to both boost and attenuate, which is basically means pull back the volume of around the same frequency, which is at 30 hertz. It looks like right here. And what that does is it just, when you both boost and attenuate, it adds this unique character and shape to that frequency by using both a boost and attenuation, which is like the age-old Pultec EQ trick. And so these are kind of the settings I landed on for this kick. And I'll bypass this, just kind of see if you can hear the difference. Let me solo it so you can really hear it. It's a very subtle thing, and it's at such a low frequency. My headphones are even having a hard time really hearing it. When you're in a better monitoring environment, like my actual studio monitors, which I'm not using right now so I don't get feedback in the mic, I can hear it better. So I don't know what y'all are listening to. Maybe you've heard that better than my headphones, but that's a nice little trick. Next one up is low control. This is a super handy plugin for, again, controlling the low end, right? As it says, it has this stupid simple compressor. You just slide the threshold to the point where you're getting the gain reduction you want. You can select the frequency to compress below. So anything that you select at that frequency and below is the only thing that the compressor is being applied to. So if you have like this real boomy low end kick, you can compress that specifically around, you know, whatever frequency that the real boominess is coming through without affecting anything else in the kick. You can solo that the frequency that you're affecting, and then this enhance is actually really nice. It actually just adds a form of saturation to the overall signal, targeting the frequency you select here, and then. PM. Event alert will appear shut up. At 12:35 p.m. Lock screen. Okay. Button, camera, photo, my phone's talking to me. All right, so. This adds a form of like I said, saturation, which actually makes the kick come through better on smaller speakers like a phone. That's literally what this is designed to do. And it also kind of boosts some of the low end around the frequency you select too. So I'll play this back with the kick on and bypass it so you can kind of hear the difference. So there you go. I can clearly hear that in the headphones here. I can hear how the low end just kind of gets a little tighter. And then with the enhance, you can hear just a very, very touch of how that saturation affects the top end. And that's basically all that's doing there. And then I don't think I'm not doing any. This is basically just for monitoring the signal. So moving on, the snare drum, spiff. I have to have spiff basically on every snare drum I use. As like a final way to just kind of beef up the low end. And this is actually using Nolly's beefy snare preset. So this is just basically boosting the low end. There's really nothing to see there. The BX saturator, this is just a nice way to add some, to just maybe roll off a touch of the transient while also adding in a little bit of top end. So I'll play this back and bypass it. You can hear the difference. Yeah, you can hear how it just kind of adds a little bit of snap on the top end there. All right, so continuing on, Pro Q. Let's see, I'm just rolling off tiny bit of the air on the snare, and then the individual tracks. I'm using two different console emulation plugins from Plugin Alliance on here. I think basically what happened is when I started this mix, I was using the console N, which is this one down here. And then eventually I think I had recently purchased the Lindell 50, which is this one you're seeing on the screen now, and started moving to that one just because I liked the way that it sounded a little bit better, especially like the EQ and the compressors in this. So I started moving to that. So as we get further down, you may see both, and that's just why you're seeing both. So on the snare top, you can see I'm just using this Lindell compressor. And again, I'm not going to kind of go into super detail on the individual settings. If you want to know more about any individual settings I'm using, just hit the Discord chat and ask there, and I'll respond after this. But I'm trying to be mindful of time here. And then Transgressor 2. So absolutely fantastic transient designer, probably the best one I have. So what I'm doing here is I just found that this GGD snare was super pokey, super transient, driven and heavy. So I pulled back the EQ just on the transient on the top end to remove some of that snap. And then I also pulled back the gain of the transient and boosted up the sustain to kind of smooth things out and get a little bit more ring out of the snare versus just all like, pokey sounding snare. So let me play back just this individual snare and turn this on and off so you can really hear the difference here. Yeah, that's a massive difference, right? Like it goes from sounding like a snare to basically like you're smacking a cardboard box or something. So excellent plugin. This is from Boz Digital Labs. And then the rest of the samples, I'm just basically doing just some EQ too. So I'll just kind of move on from there. The toms, I'm basically doing the same thing. Just a tiny little bit of EQ and compression. And it doesn't even look like I'm really doing much EQ of anything here on these. So it's mainly just a little bit of compression. And these are coming from GGD and then blended with the Bogren samples. So they just sound really damn good already. Didn't really need much. One trick that I've come to really love is on my hi-hat and sometimes my cymbals is to use the Focusrite Red equalizer, specifically the top shelf here. This EQ is just absolutely shut up. This top end EQ, it's this really smooth top end that I just love the way that it sounds. So I'll play this back and see if you can. Actually, I don't even know if there's any hi-hat in this. Let me see if there is. I don't even think there's any hi-hat in here, so I'm not going to show it to you, but just trust me, it sounds good. Let's see, I don't have it on any of the cymbals here, but it's a really great sounding EQ. And then the overheads and the rooms, let's take a quick look here because these are where I tend to spend a good amount of time really trying to dial things in because I'm a big fan of like those open, airy sounding rooms. Yeah, I know. I'm assuming y'all can hear the damn phone. I just saw your comment. Hey, Siri, stop interrupting the live stream. All right, so this is where I spend a good amount of time. After I've kind of dialed in the shells, like the main core of the mix, the kick, the snare, and then the toms, I usually, I'll just kind of level off, the hats and the cymbals, and then move to the overheads and the rooms and spend a good amount of time there. especially the rooms. So let me just solo the overheads and we'll see what they sound like. So you can see we're getting, a little bit of the snare, a tiny little bit of the kick in there. So I like having that coming through in those overheads, and it just sounds more natural. Because in these drum libraries, you could completely pull it all out, so it's just cymbals, but that sounds so unnatural because it's basically impossible to do that right with a live drummer. So the actual processing I'm doing here, you saw it's just got a little tiny bit of compression just to kind of smooth things out a little bit. I think it was at most maybe 2.5, maybe 3 dB is what it's coming back, or what it's ducking. And then we're pulling back a little bit of the kind of the top end around 15K and up. I believe this is set to, you can see this button down here. And so, that's a top shelf is what that is. So 15K and up. So it's essentially a top shelf at 15K. Pulling that back like 2 dB just to kind of pull back a little bit of that top end because it was just a little bit much. And then pulling back 500 hertz, which is kind of those boxy frequencies, especially in overheads and rooms. And then at 400 hertz, pulling back a little bit more. And so let me just turn off this plugin and see if we can hear a difference. Yeah, so it's a bit subtle, but you can really hear it in those high end frequencies, the air of kind of like the cymbals, and then the low. You started to hear a little bit more of that kick coming through. So that's basically what's happening there. Let's see if I'm doing anything here. So this must have just been a resonant frequency I was pulling out, pulling back just a little bit more of the air up there, and then Soothe, one of my all-time favorite plugins here, just to kind of smooth out those cymbals. You can see what's happening here, and then I'll activate the delta, and you'll hear the frequencies that it's actually pulling out. That it's using its fancy algorithm to basically detect like those resonant frequencies that are going to cause that just make the things sound bad, and it pulls those out automatically for you. So it was probably pretty quiet, so I don't know if you heard it or not. I could hear it in my headphones, but if you don't have the volume up kind of fairly loud, you probably didn't hear much, but you could hear it with those resonant frequencies that just sound terrible. So having this on here just kind of ducks those out for me automatically. So that's basically on my overheads. A lot of time it's on my cymbals as well. Then the rooms, let's just go ahead and have a listen to what the rooms sound like. All right, so you can hear we've got a decent amount of the kick in there, the snare, some of the cymbals. Again, I love that like open, roomy sound in my drums. So we've got the Lindell again, but this time we're using the FET compressor because I wanted a really fast, a really fast compressor that could really kind of duck things. Just to kind of roll off transients, because I don't care about transients in my room, right? Like I'm going to get all of that in the direct samples and the direct tracks. So here I'm just looking for that sustain, that open sound in the rooms. So let's just kind of have a listen to what this sounds like off. I'll bypass it after I start the playing. Yeah, massive difference with that fast FET compressor in here. And that's one of the other big selling points for me on this particular plugin is that you can change between a VCA and a FET compressor built in. So it's got these interchangeable modules built in. And you can also change between 3 different styles of EQ, which is fantastic. So like there's so many things you can do with this one plugin. But it doesn't look like I'm doing anything on the EQ here. Just boosting up the input signal and just setting the FET compressor, and that's basically it. And then from there, I am using a touch more of compression. So I think the FET compressor was just to kind of immediately roll off those transients, give me a little bit more sustain. And then this is more, I've got it on fast attack and fast release as well. So this is actually going to roll off a little bit more of the transient and maybe just add a little bit more sustain. One of the things I really love about this compressor though, is how it adds this. For one, it's got this V gain setting up here, which adds basically some like distortion almost, if you will. It's like a form of saturation, but it just kind of it gives you this overall like vintage vibe to the sound. So I'll play this back with it on, and then I'll bypass it and we'll hear the difference. So you can really hear the difference on this one. So this one I've got really cranked down. It's dropping, it's ducking like 12 plus dB here. So this is really where we're getting a lot of that sustain. So the way that I think I set this up is the FET compressor, super fast, rolling off the transients, making sure we're just kind of working with the sustain when it goes into the townhouse, so that I can just really extend out that sustain and make those rooms just sound massive, right? Like listen to the difference in this with both of these turned off, and then I'll turn them on, and it goes from like this tiny sounding room to a massive room. Yeah, that's where it's at. And then so just to kind of give you an example here, soloing the drums with all of that processing that we just kind of walked through, this is what the drums sound like. Sound really good. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to solo the overheads in the rooms, and then I'll kind of mute them and bring them back in so you can hear what the difference that those two make in this mix. Yeah, you can really hear how those rooms just bring everything to life. All right, so we're at 12:43. We're running short on time. So bass. This is going to be submission audio gin bass, but this is the DI output. From there, I've actually got two individual tracks. I basically took a lazy route on this one. The way that I usually do this is I have a 200 hertz split, where 200 hertz below is straight DI signal, 200 hertz and up is an amped processed with some distortion, all of that. Are you using any separate reverb sends for your snare tom? Oh yes, thank you for reminding me. Snare and toms, and a little bit of the kick as well, are going through the drum verb and the drum punch. Those are routed through there. So you can see right here, drum punch and verb are going through. So we've got both the kicks, the kick samples, the snare top, snare bottom, and then all my toms. All of them are being routed into the punch and the verb. And so I'll solo this back, and I'll solo both of those auxes, those buses, so you can hear the difference. It's not massive, if I recall. It's more of a subtle thing. You'll probably hear the drum verb on the snare more than anything, but here's what it is. Here's what it sounds like with it on, and then I'll mute the buses. So again, in the whole context of the entire mix, you probably wouldn't notice it. I can hear the drum reverb coming in there. Let me see if I can solo this. I think I can. Yeah. So there you go. There's an example of what each of those buses are doing. So the drum verb is, and this is going through the Slate Digital Verb Suite Classics with the digital plate. You can see the settings that I've got there. Obviously, before this, I've got some EQ, getting rid of some of that super boomy low end, pulling back some of the highs, and then a resonant frequency there. And then I'm going into a compressor to pull off transients and add sustain. So I'll play this, I'll solo this back and mute the compressor so you can hear how it goes from like a small room to like a bigger room when I turn this on. So there you go. That just kind of rolls off a little bit of the transient, adds a little bit more sustain, makes the reverb sound bigger. And I like that because that's how I process my rooms. Versus using a longer decay on the reverb itself. I use a shorter decay on the reverb and then use a compressor to shape the transient or roll off the transient and add more sustain so that it sounds like a bigger room. I like the way that sounds better than just cranking up the decay on the reverb. And then the drum punch, you heard that. It's just all transient, just super smack, just a little bit of the top end snap in there. And that just kind of helps those cut in a mix. All right. Thank you for the reminder on that. So those are those aux tracks. So the bass, again, I'll just kind of run through this real quick. We're less than 15 minutes now. So this is the DI signal, I believe. That's just 200 hertz and below. Oops. I got something soloed. Let's come back down. Yeah. So you could even see on the EQ that it was basically just 200 hertz and below. That's just my DI signal. I don't want to touch it. I don't want to distort it. I just want to leave it there for the foundation of the mix. And then the other side of this is the distorted signal. And this is actually running through the Black Sun, which is a guitar amp. But I found that I liked the distortion of this on the guitar. And this is not using any cabinets. The cabinets turn off, the IR loader is off. So it's the DI signal running through 200 hertz and up EQ right there, pulling back some of the boxy frequencies in the mids, running through the Black Sun, and that's it. And this is what it sounds like. I thought that sounded fantastic for, that's being a guitar amp. It worked really well for the bass. So when you put it all together, you get the low end, the DI with that, and this is what you get. Incredible sounding bass. I think that sounds awesome. And then so looking at the bass bus, we have Soothe 2. Why am I doing Soothe 2 and why is it only on the low end below 300 hertz or so? This is actually receiving a sidechain signal from my kick drum. You can see I've got it set up right up here where it says kick sum, and I've got the sidechain turned on. So what is happening here is Soothe 2 is receiving the signal from my kick drum, and it's actually ducking the primary frequencies from the kick drum in the low end here from the bass. And that way I don't have the bass guitar and the low end sub frequencies from the kick drum trying to fight for that space in the mix. So I'm going to play this back and you'll see how this ducks when the kick hits. And in order for this to work, I can't solo the bass. I have to play the whole mix so that the kick and the bass are playing at the same time. I could just solo the kick and the bass, but it'd be easier just to play the whole mix. So here it is. And just notice that the ducking that you'll see in the low frequencies is coming from the kick drum. Think about that association when you see the ducking. So there you go. That's just a really handy trick that I found. Helps tame the low end of your overall mix without it becoming super boomy and those low end frequencies starting to build up on top of each other. So I'm ducking those low sub frequencies from the bass guitar when the kick hits, based on the foundational primary frequencies of the kick itself. And then we're going into low control. As I mentioned on my kick drum, doing the exact same thing here, just kind of got the frequencies pulled down a little bit. And then adding just a subtle bit of this enhancement and that saturation so that it comes through better on those smaller speakers. I'll bypass this as it starts playing and see if you can kind of hear the difference. If anything, you may just hear a little bit more of the low end tighten up a little bit based on the compressor, and then possibly be able to hear a little bit more of the upper mids and highs and the in the bass here as well, so we'll see what you can hear. Let me solo it, otherwise you probably won't hear anything. So here's the bass. Yeah, so like those sub frequencies, you know, below 85 hertz is where I could really hear it. Just kind of that compressor really kicked in and just kind of tightened things up. But one thing I want to go ahead and show you here with this plugin is this solo, how you can solo what you're doing in this. And then that way I can really point out exactly what the enhance is doing. So watch the EQ here to the left, or to the right, sorry. As I play this back and then increase the enhance, you'll see how it kind of brings up those upper frequencies and adds saturation to them. So that's basically how that works. And obviously you've seen it fairly low on the kick drum and on my bass here. There are some situations in which I've turned it up maybe 50%, and those are on things like synths and stuff like that. But this is just a subtle thing I like to add to help make sure that it kind of translates well on those smaller speakers. Yeah, low control does work nicely, Joey. It certainly does. And just the ease of use and how quickly you can dial things in, right? Like you don't have to worry about attack times, release times, thresholds. It's one slider, you know, you pull down the slider or move it up until you're getting the gain reduction you want at that low frequency, and then turn up your enhance until until it sounds good in your mix and you're done. So speed is definitely something they were focusing on when they built that. And then my bass, just rolling off some of the top end and the super sub frequencies as well, just to try and make sure that it doesn't get too crazy on either end. And I will note that this is at a 30 decibel zoom, so this is zoomed way out. That's zoomed in a little bit more. And then that's the bass. So 7 minutes left, and we have guitars and synth. So there's really not a lot to go through with the guitars. You can see I'm not doing a lot. So the guitars, let's see what we got going on in the EQ. Okay. This is really kind of one of the big things I wanted to point out with the guitars is, you know, when you're doing those low chugs, Vin, welcome. I just saw your comment. So when you're doing those low chugs with the guitars, you're not going to get real woofy in the low end, right? Because when you're palm muting, all of a sudden you get that woof from the low end from the bass, kind of really coming through hard. Well, what I've found that works really well for me, there's probably a million ways you could do it with like a multi-band compressor, things like that. But using Pro-Q's dynamic EQs works really well. And I've got this pulled back. I've got this dynamic EQ on here at like 250 hertz and down, this low shelf. And I'll play this back, solo the guitars here, so you can just hear what the guitars sound like outside the context of the mix. And then we'll talk a little bit more about how I put together those tones. But here's what this low shelf is doing. So you could see how, as it was playing in the open chords, it just kind of ducked a little bit because some of those low end frequencies were coming up. But then when I started getting into the chug, the palm mute part, it really ducked it further. And in fact, there is a full on palm mute section right here before it transitions. Let me move over here and you can really see it. Oh, went just too far. Here it is. There you go. You could really see it in that last one that kind of rung out, how those low frequencies are trying to spike, and this dynamic EQ said, nah, we ain't going to have that. And it brought them down. All right, so there's really not much more I need to go into on the guitars, other than I will say that the IRs are the Christian Cola pack. And in fact, I'll just pull it up real quick so you can, I'll tell you what they are. It's the Sludge Tunnel and the Dark and Raw Crunch. And I think I did the same thing on both sides. Let's see. No. So that's the left channel. The right channel is Juicy Vintage Fullness. And the right is Swamp of the Dead. Or I'm sorry. It's Juicy Vintage Fullness and Swamp of the Dead on the right. So those two are being paired on the right. And the actual tone came from my quad cortex. So that's why you don't see any like amp sim plugins on these guitar tracks here and here. That is because those were tracked through the quad cortex without any impulse response. So it was going through all the processing, through any EQs, boost pedals, into the amp sim without the IRs. And I tend to do that a lot because I want to be able to experiment or possibly change up the IRs as I'm mixing. Because as I start getting further into the mix and I'm adding synths and layers, I may find that the IRs were too dark or too much mid-range or too bright even for the mix. And I can't go back and change it if it's in the recorded signal. So I record the signal without the IRs so I can add them here in the DAW. And then the last part of this is the synths, and I'll just kind of quickly play these back so you can hear them. I'll show you what they are. So this is the Analog Dreams. I believe they give you this when you purchase Kontakt, like the full Kontakt player. So this is a Kontakt Play Series, Analog Dreams. And I think they're all the same, if I recall. Okay, the only one that's different is this Ethereal Earth, however the hell you say that. So let's just go ahead and have a listen to what the synths sound like. They sound really, really good. So that last one you just heard is the Ethereal Earth, again, however the hell you say that. And so just looking at the processing here, pulling out some of the lows, making sure none of these synths get too boomy in the low end. That's on the synth bus. Then we have a synth Verb, which is Valhalla Supermassive, absolutely fantastic free plugin. If you don't have this, you got to go get it. And that's being routed to all of them. All of them are, well, it looks like except for this last one, this one's muted, but all of the other ones are being routed to that Verb bus. Then you can ignore the violin. This was my 12-year-old daughter. She's on her like halfway through her second year of violin in middle school, and I said, you're welcome to come down to the studio and try to track some stuff. So we're kind of working on throwing in some of her violin playing into this track. So stay tuned for that. So I'm looking forward to sharing that with y'all. But the synths here, so this is basically this is one of the other Black Salt Audio. So Low Control that you saw earlier is from Black Salt Audio. This is also from Black Salt Audio. Fantastic plugin, super easy to use. It's just saturation. Two settings. You just crank up the amount of saturation, and then you can adjust the output signal because it does get louder as you pull up the saturation. But let me, I'll play this synth here and just show you the difference with and without escalator, just so you can see what it sounds like. And I've got this one about halfway up. So you can hear like in those upper frequencies how it just kind of gets a little bit more raspy. And I'll really crank this up so you can hear what this thing can do. Back it up. So you can get an example there. I think another really good example is this last one right here. Because I think I've got this one up a pretty good ways. Yeah, 80%. So have a listen to this one. So I really liked the way that it just distorted that synth sound. It sounds good without it, but I just really like that distorted sound from this as well. So another super handy plugin that's just really quick and easy to use. And so all these individual synth tracks routing through the synth bus. And that's essentially it. And I think kiddos involved. Yeah, definitely got to get the kiddos involved. So we're at 1 minute over. So that's basically it. I will say, if you have any further questions, anything you want to know more, drop into the Discord and the mixing channel and ask away. I'd be happy to jump in there and answer any questions. And if you're watching the recording of this, obviously feel free to do the same. Drop in the Discord and ask any questions you have. And again, if it's specific to the mix, anything about the mixing process, the routing, any of that, mixing channel. If it's specific to a particular plugin that I've demoed in this, then maybe use the plugins channel and just ask about the plugin there, and I'd be happy to answer any questions there or share more. Yeah, thank you all so much for dropping in and doing this. This is obviously the very first time I tried to do this. If y'all think this went well, then maybe we can do this like a monthly thing. Yeah, I had a lot of fun doing this. So yeah, thank y'all so much. And with that, I'm going to end the stream. So thank you so much for checking this out. Take care, everyone.